Are you ready? Ready to bring a revolution to your relationships? Ready for the experiences on your dating adventure to evolve? Ready for more passion, intimacy, connection, and love in your relationship? Ready to heal past relationship wounds? You're in the right place. I'm Alan, the love engineer, and this is the Relationship Revolutions podcast. In this series, you'll get guidance and tips from me, interviews from other relationship experts, insights from couples who already have a great relationship, and other mind-opening conversations. Well, welcome to Relationship Revolutions, Mr. Mark Deeks.
Thanks very much.
First two questions. How are you and where are you?
I'm all right, yeah. It's Friday, my favourite day of the week. And I'm in a town called Blythe, which is about 10 or 11 miles northeast of Newcastle on the Northumberland coast.
Excellent. So, I'd recently had Ian Bickle on, who's also from the northeast, and he's saying, although I may sound like it, I am not a Geordie.
Well, I mean, I'd rather you argue the other way. Like, people should want to be a Geordie.
But he says that there is a difference in the accent and the twang and everything else, but you can always tell when somebody is somewhere from the northeast, but not necessarily from the town.
Yeah, I've got quite a mild Newcastle accent, mostly because I've spent a lot of time not like trying not to speak like that, because I'm very, very proud of where I'm from, but because I spend a lot of my time talking to people who aren't from the region, you kind of find that you sometimes try and just lessen the effect. But I mean, if I know I'm talking to people just from Newcastle, then it's a little stronger.
Excellent. So would you like to share a little bit about your background and how you got to be where you are today and what it is that you do?
Well, yeah, big question. So I've been a musician all my life. Started playing piano when I was 5. I was teaching piano when I was 15. I'm 46 now. I've made a living out of music all my life in one form or another. So, as I say, I spent 30 years teaching piano. I've run choirs, community choirs, for more than 25 years. I did 9 years as a college music lecturer. But I've been out of the education business for 12 years now, fully self-employed. Work as a freelance musical director. Now I spend more of my time doing some speaking. I guess you could call it motivational speaking, although I'm not necessarily a massive fan of that term. But I speak publicly about the connection between music and mental health, and the connection between music and wellbeing. Stems from, I guess, my own mental health journey, and how I've used music in my life. I'm in 2 signed bands. Heavy metal is my passion, which might go as no surprise, sat in a Maiden t-shirt. And, so both of those bands are release records and have a little following across the world. And so in one form or another, in a very varied way, music is the thread.
And what a beautiful thread it is. And it's actually that connection between mental health and music that came up with my own journey when I was recording the episode here with Helen Goad. And she mentioned you and introduced us. And here we are.
Absolutely.
2 Maiden fans that have never met, but in some ways talking as if we've known each other for years.
Because that's what music does. It's the ultimate connector. It's like following a band or following a sporting team. When you follow the same thing, you've got the immediate connection. This notion of shared identity or imagined community, imagined identity, that people who have similar interests feel like they all automatically have a similar identity. Of course, the identities may be very, very different. But as soon as we share a sporting interest or a musical interest, there's that connection straight away.
So, as a professional musician, that for many children when they're going through the school system is a dream. How does it feel to make that dream a reality?
I mean, I remember that apparently one of my mum's friends said to her, are you going to not make sure he does a real subject kind of thing for A-level music, or when it came to going to university and did a popular music studies degree? Yeah, I think it's also particularly the case being from the Northeast. There's long since been a historical sort of mindset in the Northeast that if anyone ever wanted to, and I use this phrase extremely loosely, but become famous, as in, make a career out of something that was seemingly fame related, although, I am not famous, but I've made a career out of music, ostensibly therefore people in the public see you do what you do. There was always this historical mindset in the Northeast that you had to move to London. You couldn't possibly make a career out of music unless you went to London. And, no offense to anyone from London, but every time I go to London, I can't wait to get out of it. It's very much not who I am, and it's just, I find it a complete sensory overload. And so I think there's definitely an element of satisfaction that I've never not lived in the Northeast, other than when I went to university in Yorkshire and worked in the music service there for a couple of years afterwards. But it was still very much in the North. And so, yeah, having made a career out of music, I think it's like anything, when you're in it, you don't really think about it. But I guess now I'm getting a bit older and I start to sort of go, here we are, a few years' time I'll be 50.
Scary thought.
It's the descent now, and we're coming into land. It's satisfying. I think that there are a lot of misconceptions about what it's like to make a living from music. That people assume, as soon as you say, I've got 2 record deals, people assume you must have loads of money. And nothing could be further from the truth, because making records and so on at the level that we do, it's still very much counting the pennies in terms of like the gigs that we do, and there is no money in it. I mean, we might sell 20,000 records and still barely make a couple of £100 each. So I mean, it means we can sort of quote unquote pretend to be rock stars on a weekend and go back to the day job, which just so happens for me is music, and the rest of the lads are like working with spreadsheets.
Yeah, so I wrote and recorded a song, when was it, back in about 2020, basically just to raise money for charity kind of thing. What surprised me was, well, it wasn't that much of a surprise when you understand the business model of the likes of iTunes, but each download is 75p, and you get like 10p of it if you're lucky. And if you then have to divide that 10p by 5 or 6 people in the band, and then the artists that designed what would have been a record sleeve and everything else, and the mixers and the producers, it's not surprising musicians don't make money out of recording music.
Yeah, well, it's actually worse than that, because, of course, in the traditional model that most of us are still locked into, although there's been a move towards independent artists more in recent years, if you're signed to a record label and they give you any money to make an album, then that is not money that they've given you. That is a debt which you must repay. And until you pay that debt, you're not seeing a penny. And so, that was once upon a time known as an advance, and it's still known as an advance, even if it's been given to you retrospectively after the record's been made. And then you're not getting all of that money back. When you sell a record for 20 quid, that's not 20 quid towards your debt. That is 15% of that 20 quid towards your debt, because the 15% is the royalty agreement, say, or 10% or 20% or whatever you've got. And so 15% of 20 quid is going towards your debt, which is split between 5 of you and so on. So, I mean, and even gigging, like we'll play some reasonable sized festival gigs and so on. Like we're playing a big festival in Spain next week, which, will have 30,000 people at it, although there won't be 30,000 people watching us. And it's going to cost us about £1,000 to play that gig. I mean, we're not making, and that's getting paid £2,000, but we've got to pay for the flights and everything out.
Yeah.
Hire cars. So, yeah, we're going to go and play to a few thousand people and have a great time and have a couple of beers, and, I'll watch Megadeth for free. Great. But I'm not making any money out of it.
That'll be to do life. The question is, will Dave Mustaine come and watch you?
Well, no, but I'm going to make a mission to shake his hand backstage, because why not?
Absolutely. I want to see the selfie of you and him appear on social media just after.
It is fully intended.
Absolutely. So, as this podcast is relationship-based, one of the things about your story that I've recently learned is that between you and your wife, I believe you're married, you sadly lost a child. So would you be willing to share a little bit of the story about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So it was 2020, early 2020, which for most people is the year that the whole world went to shit, and for us it's the whole world, the year the whole world went to shit, and we lost a child. Of course, we're not alone in that. These things go on all the time, but until you personally experience, it's like many things, you don't really know what it's like. So yeah, about 10 days before the first UK lockdown, my wife Angela was 20 weeks pregnant at the 20-week scan, and got the news that every new parent dreads. We didn't want to know the gender. It was going to be a surprise, but we were forced to find out that our baby, who we now discovered was our daughter, had 2 terminal conditions, one of which was dangerous to my wife as well. And so our daughter had 0 chance of survival, and it was causing Angela some risk. But in that circumstance, we very quickly learned what's known as a TFMR, which is a termination for medical reasons, which was presented as an option to us, which is a strange scenario to be in, because, of course, the last thing you want is to lose your child. You've been given this extraordinarily difficult news, but the legal situation is it's your choice. So you're allowed to say, no, thank you for this information you've given us, but we fancy our chances. And just crack on with it and hope for the best. Or you can terminate the pregnancy and all of the stuff that comes with that. And so it's a very strange sort of guilt-ridden kind of scenario, because legally it's your choice. No one's making you do anything. So yeah, we decided that was the only way that we could proceed. It seemed like the lesser of 2 evils.
Yeah.
And so that's what we did. We quickly sort of, as I say, within days, we're in lockdown and now rattling around the house trying to process this without the kind of usual sort of framework of support that you might have hoped for from your family at that kind of time. Of course, our family were concerned, but no one could see anyone. So, yeah, what then sort of unfolded off the back of that is the mental health journey that you go on, trying to process that, trying to deal with both our businesses being in a very different situation to what they were normally. Angela really couldn't work at all. I was having to sort of quickly try and make everything that I do work online. And I'd already sort of experienced some mental health difficulties in the sort of few years before that, just occasionally off and on, nothing serious, just mild, what I might loosely call depression, but it would just be anything from a few hours to a day or two, and then it would just pass. And but within a few months of losing who we'd called Laurie, I was panic attacks, anxiety off the chart, not really knowing quite how to process anything. So I then sort of had to work out how to use music as part of the solution for me, because I professionally tell people to turn to music in times of difficulty. And for me, I guess as a working musician, the line between music as a hobby and music as a job can be blurred sometimes, because I'm just around music 24/7. And so it was a case of trying to unpick how to try and use music to process that.
Yeah. So for anyone who may be listening finds themselves in that position of whether to get that termination for medical reasons or risk it, how do you go about weighing up that kind of decision?
I mean, I know that like the subject of termination and abortion is a hugely emotive subject, and understandably so. There is, like, for us, it sounds horrible to say, but it was a quite quick decision. I mean, we were given 2 medical conditions, given information on 2 medical conditions that our baby had, that meant her prognosis was utterly bleak. And as I say, one of those was potentially dangerous to Angela as well. And so, what can you do in such a situation? She technically could have been born, but it was like nigh on impossible. And even if so, would have quickly died. And so, that doesn't sound like a future for anyone.
No.
And so, whilst it was, a crushing pain like nothing else, what could you do?
Yeah.
So you're quite quickly thrust into admin and paperwork, and because legalities in terms of when these decisions are allowed to be made and when they're not, there was a cut-off point around 22 weeks that only certain surgeons were happy to proceed, and so on. I mean, all that kind of stuff. We were like 21 weeks and 5 days, so it was a pretty swift scenario. Within a few days, we were now in the situation of having to deal with the aftermath. So yeah, I mean, it's you quickly end up in a situation where you become part of this, what is loosely known as this baby loss community, where there are all kinds of charities and groups and organizations of people who go through it. And when you become part of that world, you find that there are people who've been through this stuff multiple times. And you start, I mean, for example, there's a charity near us called Teardrop, who are part of our support network afterwards, and they have an annual event nearby where there's like a candlelit vigil and people gather together to remember children they've lost. And it's this really beautiful, emotive, quite simple but very emotive event. And they read out the names of the children who've been lost. And some families are 5 children, and it's just unprocessable how anyone could cope with going through that situation more than once, because like we know the impact it's had on us once. So yeah, like I say, it's a situation like many others that you don't know what it's like until you're in it, kind of thing, and then you suddenly having to process it and having to deal with it, and you realize just how many people and how many times this can happen, and also just you realize just how many things can go wrong with a pregnancy. Like we've said to each other before, it's a wonder anyone's ever born. When you start to be around the absolute plethora of things that can go wrong with birth and pregnancy. I mean, that's not to say a bleak thing, because clearly billions of people are successfully born with no issue whatsoever. But it makes you realize just how many pregnancies happen and how many are not successful. It's extraordinary to be around. And but it's a subject that no one really speaks about because no one knows how to. And that's the thing that you realize. You don't know how to speak about it, like almost to each other. And then when you tell anyone what's happened, like, the first thing that anyone wants to do is say, "Oh, I'm terribly sorry for your loss. And sorry that you've gone through that." And all you can say is, "Yeah, I know. Please don't be sorry." Like, what can you say? Like, no one knows how to.
Yeah.
No one knows what the language is that they should use. No one knows what the terminology. Even using the word termination. We had an experience of a TV production company making a documentary for Channel 4 that asked us to be on it and interviewed us for an hour, or like as a pre-interview before they would film us, and didn't tell us what the name of the program was going to be called, and presented it as it was going to be like a really sort of caring story approach to parents who've been through this kind of situation. And in reality, it was going to be named something like the rights and wrongs of abortion or whatever it was. And yeah, great, thanks very much. That's not going to force people's opinions before they watch a program. And to us, it wasn't. I think what happens is before you're in it, you don't realize the different strands of baby loss. People just call it, people are familiar with the concept of, say, miscarriage, in that, but the perception of that is that's happened to a woman. Something has happened in order for that event to occur.
Not her choice.
No one's fault. There was no choice involved. It's just happened on us. Oh, suddenly, this has occurred. But that's not what a TFMR is like. A TFMR is like, here is a baby inside you that we're now telling you has no chance. What do you want to do? That's a very different scenario.
Yeah. And you've got the choice of potential, probably however it happens, whether it's termination before birth or natural causes after birth, losing that child, or losing the child and the mother.
Well, yeah, I mean, you just don't know.
Yeah,
I mean, that's the thing with pregnancy, man. It's weird, like, particularly as a man, you don't want to make it sort of like, clearly our role in the situation is minimal compared to what the woman's going through. And I regularly was sort of around conversations where I was saying, look, I realize I'm not the most important person here in the room. I get that. That's absolutely fine. But let's not dismiss the fact that, like, I couldn't feel any more helpless if I tried, because there's literally nothing I can do about this other than sit here and hold her hand, like, and tell her I love her, kind of thing. What else am I supposed to do?
Yeah.
So it's a very, very strange environment. But obviously, like, the women are getting an extraordinarily rough end of the deal. But yeah, it's a difficult one for everyone in that room.
Yeah, I was listening to the podcast on the Guild of Dads where Joe interviewed Dr. Anna Kitchen, and she actually did a lot of research into the support that dads get, and she found there was absolutely nothing. And that was triggered by her own experience where she'd had a traumatic birth. Her husband was there watching the whole thing. She says, I'm getting this support, I'm getting this, I'm getting that. And she's looking at him, and he's like a bystander, kind of looking through the window, so to speak.
Yeah.
And he's got nothing, despite the fact he's watching his wife and newborn child go through hell.
Yeah, I mean, so the sort of PS to the story is we now have a happy, healthy daughter who's 2.5, and yeah, her birth was not straightforward whatsoever. And while she's, as I say, healthily here, that was a pretty freaky situation to go through, particularly given our history. And the strange thing is, so for example, our hospital has what they call a rainbow clinic, which is where once a week, for an afternoon, that clinic is solely women who have gone through child loss, who are now pregnant. So they're checking pregnancies all day, every day, but on a Wednesday afternoon, it's only women who've gone through some form of child loss. So, which I think is a great idea, and it immediately should mean bedside miner is turned up to 11, kind of thing. But that wasn't always the case because it was in the pandemic.
Yeah.
And so it was like, husband's not allowed in the room, or husband's got to go and wait in the cafe downstairs. And I was like, no. So, and when I tried to sort of reach across to hold her hand, and the woman in her mask is going, "Oh, back, give me a break."
Yes, like so, hold the handle at home all day, every day. Now is not going to make a massive difference.
I was 2 inches too close to her, to the woman doing the scan, because I'd leaned towards my wife to hold her hand. Give me a break. So, without getting into the whole pandemic debate. So, yeah, it's a very strange environment for the partner to be in. Whilst, as I say, I repeatedly said, by all means, we prioritise Angela, whatever answer needs she gets. But yeah, watching it is very strange.
Yeah. Yes. Losing a child in any way, shape or form is probably one of the most traumatic experiences that life can bring us, because we lose parents and pets and whatever else, but we expect our parents to pass before us, not our children.
Yeah, absolutely. But of course, I think that, you don't want it to become, sometimes I call it grief top trumps,
Yeah.
Whose grief is more valid or more important or more painful than anyone else's. And it's not, of course. Everyone's experiences are their own, and who are we to judge what anyone else is going through? But you find that there is a perception, I think, that if you haven't met your child because they haven't been born, that is somehow a lesser grief. And, let's face it, I don't know. But I can tell you that it's awful. And because of the way that it happened, the guilt associated with it is pretty rough. But, I'm just trying to make something positive out of it now, which is why I speak so openly about it. And I think the way that I've dealt with it is that I couldn't deal with the bad thing happening in isolation. There has to be something really positive that happens as a result of it. Otherwise, my brain just can't cope with it. So, I think really the starting point was, which is the story I tell in my TEDx, that the song that was our first dance at our wedding was also the song that was playing in the reception when we found out we were losing Glory. And of all of the billions of songs, obviously being obsessed by music as I have been all my life, I clocked it immediately, and Angela clocked it immediately. I mean, that's just cruel kind of thing. Because now our happy song is now a saddest song as well. I mean, that's just awful. Yeah. Why would you do such a thing? Universe or whatever. So music was immediately sort of part of the story, and then.
So after that, when you first got that devastating news, I'm guessing at some point, either when you got in the car to go home or when you got home, there was one go-to music track that you went straight to in that moment? Or was it just a random thing?
It's not as clean as that. I mean, so the song that was our first dance was Nothing's Gonna Stop Us Now by Starship. But as I say, this was now also the song associated with this awful moment. So, yeah, I couldn't listen to that for months. That went from a song that we would throw on in the house or car randomly to, as a sort of gesture of romance to, no, I mean, I don't want to hear that now. There was an album that I was listening to outside the hospital on my own when Angela was in surgery. I still can't really listen to that, even now we're sort of 4 years later. I think it's just like, for me, it was creating music as a result of it. So my brother-in-law and sister-in-law got a star named after Laurie for us as a gift, and this star chart arrived in the post with the star coordinates on of where the Laurie Deeks star was. And at the time, I was writing an album for my solo project called Arth, which is an Old Northumbrian word which means my native land, because I'm really interested in how musicians represent where they're from and their music. And it was around the time I was, a few months after we'd lost Laurie. I was really struggling. But 3 o'clock in the morning, I suddenly sat up in bed and thought, what if those numbers weren't star coordinates? What if they were the numbers of a musical scale, the notes of a musical scale? What does that sound like if we play it as a melody? And that's the numbers that are the coordinates on my tattoo on my arm. And so that melody ended up as the last melody you hear on the Arth album. And, the album's not about what we were going through. The album's about a Northumbrian saint called St. Cuthbert and the journey of his relics from Holy Island to Durham Cathedral. But there's a little musical nod there to Laurie that if you know it's there, it's there. And what it meant was that, as I was saying before, I couldn't cope with the negative thing in isolation. It had to result in something positive. So had Laurie not existed, that melody would never have been written. And it's on, vinyl, it's on CD, you can download it or whatever. And so that was that was a really big healing step for me. That was her theme. Even though the song's nothing about her, that melody now is her in musical form for me. And so that's kind of my musical therapy. It was awful recording it in the studio, and it's very strange to perform it live. I quite often get quite emotional when we perform it live, but I don't want to start sobbing on stage. It's not very mellow. But when we perform it live, I quite often sort of look up and have a word to myself for a second. But that was a big healing stage for me to make a musical nod to her existence.
Yeah. I just remember when after my marriage broke down, separation, all that kind of stuff. The one day it kind of hit me that I was couldn't afford to live in what was our family home. Although I was working full time in my own business, as only providing a part-time income. Sort of looked at my whole situation as like, I can't sell the house, I can't rent it out, I can't live in it. What the hell do I do? And my kids need a great dad, and how the hell do I be that? It's like, my mind at that time was such a mess. As so many times going through challenging times, I turned to music. Why I went for these 2 CDs, I don't know, but there are a couple I was gifted to by Mike Tramp over in Tasmania.
Mike Tramp of White Lion?
That's the one, yes.
And Freak of Nature.
And Freak of Nature, indeed. I got to say him quite a bit while I was over there. Well, the family I was staying with were good friends of his, so he popped round one day and sort of had a chat, and I'm like, can you sign this CD, please? Then the next day he came back and gave me two of his solo albums, both autographed, and I was thinking, what a cool dude. Then, 12 years later, put these 2 CDs on when I'm in a complete funk. The first song that hit me was Can't Take Away My Rock and Roll. I'm like, okay, I can lose the house, I can lose the car, I've already lost the wife and the kids, and she told me numerous times I needed to sell my guitar, like that Jackson one behind me, and I'm like, I'd rather get rid of you, love. So she can take everything, but she can't take that music, so it's like, listen to that about, I don't know how many 100 times, and then put the other CD on, and the song called Better Off, and it almost sounds like he's singing from the perspective of my kids when they're older, saying, is he better off now that his father is dead and all this, that and the other? Bastard. But at the same time, that flicked a switch inside me to kind of raise my game, if you like, and learn how to be a dad.
Yeah, I've got Freak of Nature vinyl, actually. I love those 2 Freak of Nature records. I had them on cassette when I was a teenager. I remember getting into them really early as a rock fan.
Yeah.
I'm less familiar with White Line and his solo stuff, but yeah, Freak of Nature, I love those two records.
Yeah, so it's like every time he comes to play a gig somewhere local, it's like, how am I going to get to this one? Every time I kind of remind him of that story, and he's like, who the hell are you, kind of thing. But yeah, it's the thing when you meet as a rock star, not necessarily as famous as the likes of Iron Maiden or Taylor Swift or whatever genre of music you like, you meet so many people, they all blend into each other. But for that person that meets you, it's a once in a lifetime kind of moment.
Yeah, I'm always conscious of that. We are at a much smaller level than that. But even at our level, people will come up to us at gigs and say, yeah, we were chatting in Belgium. Just like the face just suggests you must remember me. I mean, I'm very grateful when someone comes up to you and says that, wants you to sign the record or have a picture or all of this stuff. But it is very difficult when 20 people might talk to you that night, and then by the time you multiply that over a number of gigs. And also, people do it following Instagram messages. So they'll say, we were talking on Instagram. Well, firstly,
How many billions?
well, no, not millions whatsoever. But there will be a number of conversations, a number of messages I've been sent on Instagram. Of course, most of those people don't have their real names, don't have their real faces. I have no notion of where they're from when they're messaging me. So this is not me complaining at all. Please don't take this to be a musician complaining about fans. It's not, but it's challenging to immediately know who someone is when you speak to them, for sure, even at our tiny level. So I can't imagine what's like for really famous people.
So did you get into music to get girls by any chance?
If I did, I certainly wouldn't have learned to play the piano now, would I? I was playing piano when I was 5. And when I discovered rock music at 15 and sort of clocking that guitar was infinitely cooler than piano. Yeah, I mean, as a kid, playing piano, you were the geek, right? You were the swotty kid. And so, yeah, I started trying to teach myself how to play guitar as a teenager because I realized that I was losing out here. Well, I mean, I did a post the other day about how it turned out all right in the end, because the new Winter Phillips singled out and we made a performance video, and there's me sort of punching the air, playing keyboards in a black metal band, and yeah, it turned out all right in the end.
Yeah, surprising how many bands actually have piano and keyboards in their music, but that person in the band is kind of off stage somewhere else.
Well, yeah, Maiden being the classic example. That's one of their text playing keyboard lines. It's one of their text playing keyboards. All those string lines on keyboards. Someone with one finger playing off stage. It's one of their roadies.
Yeah.
Shock. Let me on stage. I'll do it.
Then the odd one like Guns N' Roses, where Axl plays piano, and after that's probably stroke his ego. And then Freddie Mercury and Queen, but they're not necessarily the same, as heavy as the likes of Maiden or Metallica, but they've still got keyboards and other stuff going on in the background.
Occasional embellishments, aren't they? It's rarely the focal point, and I understand that. I've been a metal fan for 30 years, I understand.
Yeah, so it was Bruce Dickinson says a lot of people get into music because they want to get girls, but the truth is girls break bands up. Why the hell would you want to do that?
It's not untrue, is it? It's not untrue.
So how did you come about the passion for metal? I know you were a teenager, but
I don't think there's anything groundbreaking about the story, Like many people, there's someone at school who had some tapes or whatever, and I remember it was around the time that Nirvana were huge, in the early 91, 92. There were a couple of kids at school who got like an Alice in Chains tape or CD, Faith No More, Metallica's Black Album, and then you quickly just start swapping tapes. And
yeah,
to be honest, like what played a big role for me was the local library, because not kids these days won't remember, but libraries used to have CDs and tapes and stuff. I was forever just borrowing stuff from the local library on my way home from school that looked like it might be cool, without any kind of real references to whether it was any good or not. And that got me into loads of stuff that I still would consider some of my all-time favourite music. So, I mean, I was just listening to Yngwie Malmsteen this morning. I mean, I just absolutely love the early Yngwie Malmsteen records. I know every note of them, and that was a random tape library on the way home from school. You know, Megadeth's Countdown to Extinction, or Killing Jokes, Pandemonium, or Ministry Psalm 69, and some Judas Priest collection, or a Deep Purple collection, or Anthrax Sound of White Noise. Yeah, these are all like really formative albums for me. So it was all the early 90s, right at the beginning of the 90s, Queensryche, just randomly sort of passing tapes around at school, but the library was a huge one. The ones I definitely remember at school are like Nirvana's Nevermind and In Utero, Faith No More's The Real Thing and Angel Dust, Alice in Chains' Dirt, Metallica's Black Album, Master of Puppets, and then Megadeth was a Top of the Pops one when I saw them around doing like Sweat and Bullets, I think, on Top of the Pops. Yeah, those were the days.
Yeah, for me, it was probably influence of an older sister.
Mm-hmm.
So I remember going on a school trip to France, and one of the lads had got a T-shirt that says Guns N' Roses on it.
Yeah.
And I thought, too scared to say anything. So when I got back, asked my sister, "Who sings Guns N' Roses?"
Yeah.
And he says, so he should introduce me. I thought, oh, okay, that's interesting. And then the one day says, "You need to listen to this tape." So, what is it? It's Iron Maiden. I'm not into all that heavy stuff. Says, "Are you sure?" Says, "Yeah." So she went away, and then a couple of days later, she came back in, took out whatever tape I was listening to, put a tape in, pressed play, and walked out. I'm like, what the hell's this? And that was the Number of the Beast album, and shall we say, life has never been the same since.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, I clearly remember having heard the Black Album as the first Metallica album I ever heard. So the Black Album was now out, so it was 91, 92, you know, really loving it, but having no reference point as to where Metallica had come from. As far as I was concerned, this is what Metallica sounded like.
Yeah.
And then my mate had a copy of Master of Puppets, and I was at his house, and he said, "This is another Metallica album." Pressed play, and the first words out of my mouth were, "Is this playing at the right speed?" Because, you know, for those of you unfamiliar, Battery at the start of Master of Puppets, after the little acoustic intro, is a much faster track than anything on the Black Album.
Yeah.
And obviously tapes can't play at the wrong speed, but I had no reference point. I was 15 or something.
Yeah.
And so I remember being completely blown away by Battery when I heard that.
Yeah. Having come the other way and heard Master of Puppets first, and the Black Album came out, and I'm like,
it's really slow.
Really know if I like this. And then I think I went to see Maiden Hillary Donington in 92, and then 93 I was going to see Metallica at the Bowl with Megadeth, and I think Alice in Chains was supposed to be there, but then they cried off, and the Almighty and a couple of other bands, and it's like, well, maybe I should give it another listen because I'm going to see them. Maybe I might want to know the words. And then I actually enjoyed it a lot more because I didn't have that expectation of this is going to be another Master of Puppets.
But you had to sort of concede that it's just an absolute 10 out of 10 album and you can't knock it.
Yeah.
There's a reason it's
Absolutely.
hundreds of millions of records.
Yeah.
There isn't a wasted note on it. And of course it's different to Master of Puppets, but it's a different band. But yeah, I mean, like a lot of bands did, you know, they changed their sound, but I often treat those bands as two separate things. Like, if I want to listen to utterly classic Megadeth, then Rust and Pieces going on. If I want to concede that they turned into an utterly great stadium rock band, then I'm going to put Euthanasia on. It's just different. And the same with Metallica. Yeah. Do I put Kill 'Em All on, or do I put Black Album on? Well, it depends on the day.
Yeah, because I think a lot of music fans will listen to the early stuff and have this idea that is that band. Well, that's cool, but that band change and grow as they get older.
I mean, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of bands who've become awful. I mean, let's face it. The last good album Metallica made was the Black Album.
If Magnetic is not too bad.
It sounds like rich, middle-aged men trying to be young.
Well, to be fair, that's what they are.
Exactly. But I came to the conclusion in the last few years that there are very, very few bands where I think they've made a better album in the second half of their career than the first half.
I would say Iron Maiden is probably one of the few.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say Maiden are an exception. And like, you know, some of their most recent records are fantastic records. but are they better than the first half?
It's down to be individual perception, I guess.
I love this kind of debate. But it's a real sort of chin stroker, have a pint to consider it. Can you think of a band who've made a better album in the second half of their career than the first half? You don't have to answer that now. That's something to consider tonight when you're staring off into the distance.
Yeah, that really would depend on like some of the bands, their early stuff I didn't get into, but then as I've grown as a person, it's completely different. So when I listen to Pink Floyd now or David Bowie and think it's fantastic. But then when I was younger, I was like, what the crap?
I just think with metal, like, part of what I love about metal is the youthful energy.
Yeah.
Slightly raucous production, the capturing of that sort of bristling adrenaline of youth. And it's just meant that I've kind of resigned myself that if I never heard another record again that hadn't been written between 1980 and 1995, I don't think I'd be bothered. But if I had to listen to everything from 1995 to now, and only that, I think I'd be really irritated. I don't think metal will ever be as great as the mid-80s to mid-90s again. And I speak as the member of two current metal bands. I've just resigned ourselves that, yeah, we're pretty good, but let's face it, we don't sound as good as Powerslave, do we?
Yeah, and I think when you look back to where it all sort of started with the guys in Black Sabbath predominantly, they were expressing how life was and just trying to escape the shit, for want of a better term. Whereas now a lot of the youngsters look at the superstars and think, I want to be like that, so I'm going to try and recreate that.
Sound angry.
Yeah.
When in fact, you've got not a lot to be angry about.
Yeah.
That's far too cynical. Judas Priest are an exception. Their last 3 records have been absolute pearlers. They're still making tremendous records. I'm a huge Judas Priest fan. But there's not many.
No, and then some kind of explode with the amazing first album, and then the rest have been crap.
Yeah.
I'm not going to mention The Darkness or anything, but...
Oh. No, please don't.
Strange people. Strange band. But anyways, so as we're coming towards the end of this conversation, even though in some ways I think we could go on for quite a lot longer.
I'm sure.
If anyone's listening to this and would like to reach out to you for a conversation that you may or may not remember, or book you to speak, or book your bands, or anything like that, where can they find you?
Simplest place is markdeeksmusic.com. That has information on all the different things, be it as a speaker or as a piano coach, or indeed for the bands. Yeah, markdeeksmusic.com is the simplest place.
Excellent. So, final question, and everyone gets this, but without any warning. As this podcast is called Relationship Revolutions, from your perspective, if there was one thing that would bring a revolution or evolution to the world of dating and relationships, what would it be?
My wife wouldn't dream of letting me answer that question. I don't know, but if my wife ever leaves me, I will never date again. I'll tell you that for free. I've said that for years. You know, me and my wife have been together for 12 years. I used to hate dating. Absolutely hate it. It's just so stressful. That establishing of boundaries and establishing of context of who the two of you are and how you do or don't interact together I just found it deeply, deeply stressful. My wife and I know each other so well now that I don't think I could bring myself to go through it again. So hopefully she'll never leave me.
Yeah, dating after a divorce is a challenging time. I certainly had that for me, and that's part of the reason I do what I do.
Yeah, I mean, it's just... It sounds ridiculous to say without sounding so old, but I didn't even have a page until I left university. So the notion of social media from a dating perspective does not fill me with any joy whatsoever. I mean, I was introduced to my wife via a mutual friend who basically sort of sent me her picture from Facebook and said, I think you would get on with her. And I was like, well, she's obviously too hot for me. So That's never going to happen. Here we are 12 years later.
Just goes to show what the old saying, don't judge a book by its cover.
Absolutely.
Or a record sleeve.
Maybe they do get the girls after all.
Excellent. Mark, it's been an honour and a pleasure chatting with you, and I'm sure we will continue the conversation at another time.
No doubt. Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening. And if you haven't already, please leave me a review on your preferred podcast platform. Click the like button and also subscribe so that you get the new episode notifications. I'm curious, what did you take away from this episode? Please share your takeaways with me. Send me an email to relationship-revolutions@theloveengineer.rocks.